Welcome to the Allison Loves Math podcast. I am super excited to introduce today's guest, Jim Frost. He is a blogger at the wildly popular website Statistics by Jim. He's the author of 3 statistics books, Introduction to Statistics, which, as I was just looking at, was #1 on Amazon for education statistics. So that's sort of a fun little celebration this morning. And his other 2 books are Hypothesis Testing and Regression Analysis. So Jim is also a writer Jim also has a column for the American Society of Quality Statistics Digest. He has 20 years of experience using statistical analysis in academic research and consulting projects. And most importantly, he loves to share his love of statistics with people, which I love. So welcome, Jim. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Great. It's great to be here with you, Allison.
So let's talk about statistics and I don't know how to make it more exciting and more engaging for students. I think that's our topic that we were thinking about talking about today. And I guess I will just preface this funnily with a plug for your book, actually, because I read your Introduction to Hypothesis Testing book quite a little while back. And the thing that I like, it sort of inspired me as a teacher from the very first couple of pages. And, you sort of open the book with just this, I don't know, sort of almost poetic description of like why statistics is important and why we need it. And it sort of, inspired me to sort of rethink how I was introducing statistics in the very first day of class. And I'll admit, I tried to do sort of my own version of why statistics, is important and why we need to learn it. And I will say, doing a little sort of like motivational speech is way harder than talking about math stuff in class. But so I just wanted to start off by saying, like, one, I really appreciate your books because I think that they really help to sort of bring statistics to life. And then 2, I wanted to sort of get your take and some of your suggestions, on, I don't know, how we can make statistics more interesting and relevant, for students.
Well, so that when I was a student way back, many moons ago, and I was just taking statistics classes, but I hadn't actually used them in practice yet. It was a whole different experience. It was kind of like the class everyone dreaded, and the examples and the way they talked about it really, at that point of having not used it, really didn't make sense. And it just, I don't know, I liked analysis, but it just didn't grab me. But then I made the transition to using them in my first big research project. It was at a university, and I was the data guy on the project. And that really opened my eyes. I mean, statistics is, the science and art of learning from data, which is exciting stuff, right? So it should be exciting, how you get your numbers, your data, but what does it all mean? And the cool thing on my first project, I realized, made it super cool was, hold on, I'm sorry. There's
No worries.
an alarm going off in here.
No worries, can pause it.
Sorry about that.
No
it would have been beeping the whole time. I don't know if you can hear it, but I heard it.
Yeah, no, I could. It's okay. Okay, let's just start back at I forget. What was the question I asked? I said
about making statistics.
Okay, so let's just jump right in and talk about how can we make statistics more interesting and more engaging for students.
All right. So so when I started my first research project where I was using statistics, it was really eye-opening. Suddenly the stuff that was in the textbooks became real, and that's when I first realized, wow, statistics is the art and science of learning from data and making discoveries. I mean, it's kind of like you're on this journey and you're into the unknown and you're discovering new things. And as the data guy on my research project, I was often the first one that would know, would learn the discoveries. Like, okay, we're doing all this work, everybody's working hard. And then I crunch the numbers and boom, I'm like the first one who knows, well, here's the answer, the outcome of all the work that goes into it. It was just cool. It's like, wow, and I'm the first one who knows. And now these might not be earth-shattering discoveries in a lot of cases, but nonetheless, in these projects, we had a team of people working for a long time, and boom, I got the answers. And it was just so cool, I thought, and it was just such a different experience than the classes I had had, and it was just eye-opening, and so that's one of the main things I try to capture is, well, why are we doing all these things? Why? And there's so many ways to get tripped up too and just come to the wrong conclusions, and no one wants that. So there's all these things that you're like, why the heck would you worry about this? Or why do we even do some of these things? And which wasn't, at least it wasn't apparent to me in my classes, but once you get into the field and you're using them, and boy, you also realize if you mess up, you could mess up bad and you'll be the one that's responsible. It's like, well, I was paranoid about questions about, well, why didn't you think of this back when we could have done something about it? But so there was a bit of drama there too, that, none of it kind of transferred into the classes so much. I'm like, wow, this is cool. It's a little bit intense at times. And but anyway, that's kind of the vibe I want to try to capture, that what you can think of as dry statistics are actually kind of exciting, and they help you make discoveries, and that you can use them in so many different areas. A lot of my research was in different academic studies, but even that's a wide range of topics. But people use them in businesses and all sorts of environments, and it's just cool. Whatever area you're working in, it helps you make sense, helps you understand what's actually going on, which I always found to be exciting. But it really just like, wow, okay, statistics is cool. It lets you do that. So that's how I try to get people interested in statistics.
Yes.
Kind of
And I
like
can
hook.
oh, go ahead.
I just say that's just kind of the hook. It's like, I just here, this is why you should care. Which I think is important for anything. It's like, why should I care? Well, here's why you should care.
Yes, yes. And I love how that's sort of a theme throughout all of your books, is well, one, it's a very friendly breakdown of statistics, but then two, you just sort of integrate that just in the sort of naturally into all of the explanations that you have. And as a teacher, I love that, right? Because as a teacher, one of the things that we try to do is to explain something differently to students if it doesn't make sense the first time, and sometimes I just feel like that sort of perspective coming from industry and experience and research and actually using this stuff, in real life, can be such a helpful teaching tool, especially, if you're a teacher who maybe doesn't have that experience personally, because, I know I have very little research experience. I did one project as an undergrad, and then I did a couple just sort of for fellowships during my master's. And honestly, like those 3 projects, I pulled so much from those, in the teaching of
Right.
statistics. But especially for, if there's teachers who perhaps, didn't take all that much statistics, at least say at the community college level, and you don't actually have that experience to pull from. I think your books are actually really great because they sort of give you, a lot of examples that you can use sort of in class, to sort of help bring it to life if you don't actually have that experience.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's what I try to do. I also try to focus not so much on the equations, because it's funny. So, statistics is a branch of mathematics, but it's kind of its own unique branch. There's
Yes.
a lot of mathematicians who can't stand statistics. It's true. And you can be really good at statistics but not be a mathematician. Now, I don't know how this jives with your classes, but a lot of my classes, they really emphasize the equations early on. And now, I'll be the first one to say equations can really help you understand it if you particularly if you already know the subject matter. Um, but when you're just starting, it's like some of these equations, you're not going into it necessarily to be a mathematician. Um, can really just kind of confuse like the whole point of things. Because I remember being confused at the whole point of things, which is because it's like, wow, these are quite some equations here. And so I actually kind of go light on equations, particularly starting out. And, there's times where they'll really help you understand what's going on. But as a whole, I try to kind of put those on the back burner a little bit and get like the main points across. And then maybe you kind of go into the equations a bit more and hopefully it makes sense. But yeah, it's funny. It's like these aren't people, statistics is used everywhere. And it's like probably the exception where someone using statistics is also a mathematician and totally into the math behind it. A lot
Right.
of times, and this is, I used to work at a statistical software company. And I was actually surprised that a lot of people who used statistics were not only not mathematicians, but they were, kind of light on the statistics too. They had a, project at work or somewhere else where they had to use it, and they're kind of like, oh, I better get up to speed. And their focus was very much on, well, I need to know what test to use and what it means, and importantly, what to watch out for. What are the gotchas? And so those in terms of applied statistics, I find that people are like, okay, well, they would love a black box of, let me just put my data in and I get out the answer that I need, and boom, that's it. It's never going to be like that. But it's kind of like, well, here's how you can navigate all these tests and know what to worry about. But sometimes it's nice to know what not to worry about, because again, I'm thinking back to my early days where I was just like, oh, I wonder what can come back and get me. And it was nice to know which one of those things were actually good to worry about, and if there's things I didn't have to worry about, well, that was even better. So you just kind of, I have to try to bring forward that whole mindset of, um, this is what it's all about. Here's, what the concepts mean and how to navigate the larger issues, and, with a few equations along the way. And sometimes I've heard people will, if they need to know the equations more, like for a class or something, that they'll use it in addition to some other book that focuses more on the equations. And then with mine covering the concepts more. But but I do work in equations as needed, because there's that those certain points where the equate where it's like, if you know the equation, then you'll get what it means. But it's just kind of trying to navigate that.
Right, right. Well, I like what you said just about it having to do with um sorry, sort of going back to the real life aspect of it, and sort of, learning sort of what to look out for and what tools you have available for you and stuff like that. And I don't know, it sort of kind of brings me back to my very first research project as a senior in undergrad. And I really realized that, when you're dealing with data in projects, it's sort of chaotic. It's not as clear cut, especially compared to the algebra classes, but even compared to a statistics class. And so I do appreciate that. I think the statistics class like introduces students to that a little bit. The hypothesis testing questions, for example, are just so different from the types of questions that you see in your typical algebra class. And I think it sort of blindsides students sometimes, because you start off by finding like the mean and the standard deviation, and then all of a sudden you're just like into something that's totally different from stuff that you've really learned before. But there's a couple of things that I think are really good about it. Is one, it teaches them, or for the students who get through it, right? They can build that confidence that they can take something that's very scary looking and that they don't really understand, and sort of muddle their way through it, right? And figure out like, okay, what are the tools that I have? What are the rules? What do I need to watch out for and stuff like that? And even though it's a very small step compared to what you do in larger research, I think it's a really nice introduction to it. So anyways, not sure where I was going with that, but I don't know. I think you just reminded me of an aspect of statistics that I really, really enjoy, perhaps compared to some of the other undergrad math classes.
Well, yeah, it's, when you're working on a research project, you're often answering a question that hasn't been answered before. So you're kind of, it's, I always say it's an adventure because, sometimes, and I've been on projects where, the type of data hadn't even been collected before. So some of it is just learning how to collect the data and, making sure it's the data that you need to answer your question. So that's like there's all that, which would be hard to replicate in a class, I'd imagine. But, there's that whole, you're on a journey and we're trying to answer this question, and you've got unexpected surprises along the way, and you don't know how things will turn out either, so
Yeah.
there's that kind of excitement. But then there's also, I hear you with the being overwhelmed with the different options and the analyses, because there's so many possibilities, and that's a lot of the questions I get are just like, well, this is the type of data I have and what I want to answer, so how the heck do I analyze it, and that's, I try to, like, well, I try to have them break it down. Well, what's the type of data you have? Because if you can see what type of data, is it continuous, is it categorical, binary, simple things like that, it can it what you can learn from it will depend on that.
Right.
And also, so you can kind of group it like, well, with categorical data, well, you're looking at this group of analyses, and so on. It's at least a way to kind of divide things up, and also get them, ideally they're thinking about this, if they were to use it in practice, well, what do I want to answer, which will also then inform what type of data do I need to collect, and then what types of tests I want to perform. So it's kind of, I can see how it's completely overwhelming when you're first getting into it, because you're just like, I don't know, I just want the answer, and but it's like, well, no, what's your question? That's where it starts, is like, you want
Mhm.
the answer, but what's the question? And then
Yes.
how are you going to measure the answer? You need to have measurements to come up with your answers. And so what type of measurements are you measuring for your answer? Well, that informs what type of analyses you're using. And so it's kind of this whole chain of events, and I can totally see how it's overwhelming. But yeah, it's, you kind of have to, yeah, break it down by types of data, and what do you want, what do you want to answer? You want
Right.
the answer, but what's the question?
Yes, so it's such a good point. And actually, and that's the part that gets skipped over a lot, I think, in the intro stats class, right? Is what's the question? Because the question's always given, right? The
Right.
question's all like, and that's sort of like the hardest part is actually done for you. It's sort of like assuming you figured out the question, here's what you do. But
Right.
you're right. The hard part is actually, oh, what is the question to begin with? And figuring that out is, a whole
That,
other
yeah,
process.
getting that just right can be challenging. And then, well, then it's like, well, how do I measure that? And I
Right.
always, the one of the biggest practical tips I give people is to go, like, when they're getting into a new study area, is to go do your research and see what other similar studies have done, because then you'll see, in the literature, well, you're probably not the first person to work in that area, maybe occasionally, but not usually. And, if you go see what other people have done, you'll at least kind of figure out their thought processes, and see what they measure, what they included, and the types of analysis they have done too, which can all, like, really, like, you're not necessarily reinventing a wheel. You might reinvent a part of the wheel, but not the whole thing. Your unique portion of it is maybe you'll focus more on. But fortunately, for most areas, you'll have this wealth of research of people, building on others, where they've already thought about most of the other things. And that's one thing I get a lot of questions about, and I think it's kind of a big relief when they realize, I don't have to figure out the whole thing from scratch. It's like, well, that's how science works. You teams will build up bits by bits, and then you kind of add your little bit at the top, and then more will build on. And it's kind of, teamwork, really. But
Right, right. Definitely. So, okay, so I have a question for you. So what came first, actually, your blog or your books?
so my blog came first. And then people start saying, hey, do you have books? You should write books. And so I'm like, I should do that. And it was, so I started with my regression book was my first one. And it was, um, boy, that was an interesting process because I'd never written a book before that. But yeah, so I wrote it, and oh, it takes a lot of work. And I just remember, I'm just being so tired. And when I was done with it, I'm like, this just better sell. Otherwise, I'm never writing another one, no matter how many times people ask. You know.
It is so much harder, I think, than it seems. I don't know. At the end, it's sort of like I've written two books, which actually don't have any math in it. It's just about how to study math. And then right now I'm working with another math professor on a statistics book. And it's sort of, when I look at the amount of time that we've spent on it, it's actually sort of insane. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, it is. And I find I go in ways of enthusiasm. Like at the beginning, it's exciting, and then you kind of keep going and you keep going and you keep going, and it's like, okay, I've got to keep going. And then you get closer to the end, and you're like, yeah, I'm getting closer to the end, and you know, and then I just remember for the first one, I was just so exhausted because then it's not just writing, it's the editing and
Lots of different
writing it,
areas, yeah.
and it's just by the end, it's like I've read it so many times, I'm just like, but it went fine. But I just remember my first thought is like, oh, if people don't like it, I'm just never doing another one. It was just my state of mind at the time, but it did all right, and I was like, hey, I should do another one. So it worked out, but um,
Yeah, yeah.
it does take more work than I realized, and even though I didn't think it was going to be like really quick and easy, but it was
Right.
it is kind of nice because people love the blogs, and but a lot of times people just want something that just kind of more in depth, and then stays with the topic from beginning to end, and covers it from all the different angles, and so I definitely see the value of both. So other people just want to come in quick, like, what's my answer, or what's I have this statistical question, what's my need to find information for it, so you're in, you get it, and then maybe you're out again, and then maybe you'll come back for something else. And so there's different kind of approaches for each. But yeah, I like them both. And I wasn't originally planning to write any books, but people asked for them, and I thought, well, I could probably do that. And
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you're writing all the content for the blog, it's huge practice for writing a book.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think, and I guess I'll sort of add to that a little bit, sort of as a teacher, I found, your books very helpful for just sort of seeing sort of little ways to make statistics more interesting and to explain things in slightly different ways and to explain why you need different things. So I found that very helpful in a way that, I maybe don't necessarily see in some of our textbooks. And then the other thing that I've also found really helpful is your website, because your website is great. There's so much content on there, and you can really, if you're just sort of in a specific lesson or have a specific question, you can kind of just go and look for the blog on that specific topic, and find some extra information there. So especially I think when you're planning your lessons out and you're thinking, all right, well, I remember teaching this last semester or last year, and it didn't go as great as I had hoped it would. Sometimes I find myself looking for different ways to maybe sort of explain something or introduce something, and I found your website to be a fantastic resource for that, for inspiration and just different ways to introduce things. So
Well,
my,
thanks.
my recommendation there as a teacher.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I a lot of that, a lot of the mindset behind the different ways of explaining things is kind of just remembering my early experiences in class, and then when I applied it, it's like, oh, I just wish someone would have said this, and then something would have clicked a lot earlier. So I try to remember what those little jewels are. It's kind of like, what were those things that because there were points where you're like, oh, that's why that's important. If I had just known, or if I had just known not to worry about that, both ways. If I had just known, someone had just said this, and I try to remember all those things and kind of go back and work those in, just so hopefully, someone else reading it will say, oh, okay, That makes sense. I'm glad I knew that. And, kind of
Yeah.
try to remember those things. So I've kind of a lot of times like, oh, what were those challenges? What was I confused by? Like with hypothesis testing, it's like a lot of times it's like I remember it's like what's the point? You know, like he's like we took us, we have our control group and our treatment group, and look, the treatment group is clearly better. So what more do you need to do? It's like, well, it's important you do hypothesis tests, but it wasn't always clear. I mean, that's some things like that. So I try to work those in.
Right, right. Perfect. Perfect. Um, can't believe we're out of time. I have so many more statistics questions for you, but we're out of time. So before we go, can you remind people where they can find your blog and your books and you?
Well, so my blog is statisticsbygym.com, and I sell PDF versions of my book on there. You can also find the books on Amazon and other places, and print, and like Kindle and stuff. But I also, speaking of questions, yeah, I one thing I like to do on my blog is I'll answer, people leave comments, and which is often statistical questions, and I'll answer them. So that's also, people will often read a post and then have further questions, and which actually helps me write new posts and add to the books and stuff. But so
Right.
it's a win-win. But that's one thing I like to do. So yeah, that's where you can find me, and just always writing about statistics.
Perfect. And I will add that you have a fantastic email list. So if you're on the website, join Jim's email list, because I don't know, at least for me, it's very fun to just sort of get the stats blogs and info that you send out just sort of in my inbox. It's sort of a fun
Yeah.
surprise to get that sort of stuff. So I enjoy that a lot.
Oh, thanks so much.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. I've really enjoyed talking with you about statistics. I have a whole bunch more questions for you, actually, on different mistakes that people make, and maybe mistakes in stats that we can remind students about. I wish that I had thought about that earlier on, because I would have loved to talk about that a lot more.
Time.
But we can talk about that on our own.
Yeah, I know.
But thank you so much for being here. This was
Sure.
wonderful, and I really appreciate having the opportunity to interview you.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right, and thank you so much for listening today. I will see you in the next episode. Bye.